Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining us here at the World Innovation Summit for Education. I'm Sami Zeidan, Senior Presenter at Al Jazeera International. I'm delighted to be the moderator for this panel discussion entitled Closing the Skills Gap in the MENA region. We have a really interesting topic to discuss, and I look forward to a lively participation from the audience through your questions as well. You know, 60% of the Middle East and North Africa region, as I'm sure you're aware of, is under the age of 25. More than 100 million youth, we're told, will enter the MENA workforce by 2020. But youth unemployment is particularly acute in the MENA region. At 29.8% this year, it's almost a third of the youth. And it's more than a quarter of the youth population. Scary statistic. It's only expected, unfortunately, to get worse. I'm an optimist by nature, but I think we need to get the scary facts out there first and grab everyone's attention, for hopefully we come up with the happy ending solutions that our panelists share the responsibility of bringing us to. This situation, of course, imposes some really pressing questions. How can we bridge the gap between what employers need and the skills students are learning? Should education systems partner with businesses in, designing the curriculum? Or should the system instead focus on promoting self-employment strategies and entrepreneurships? How do you create enough employment opportunities for that level of youth which are continuously entering the job market? It's a huge challenge for any region in the world, let alone the MENA region. We have three experts with very different regional perspectives on what's happening with education, employment, and entrepreneurship in the MENA region. Their work focuses on closing that unemployment gap, incubating startups in not so entrepreneur-friendly environments, shall we say, and diversifying the workplace with initiatives to increase female employees in the workforce. I want to take this opportunity to tell a funny story. I find funny stories usually get everyone's attention. But I think it also sort of symbolizes the challenge in deciding how do you close the skills gap and who determines what's a quote-unquote useful skill. You may have heard the story of the princess and the frog. I got a slightly different take on it. So one day the princess is walking in a palace garden, and she finds a frog that says, "Ribbit, ribbit, I'm actually a prince. I have a treasure and a palace. If you give me one kiss and turn me back into a prince, I'll share everything with you." So she takes the frog home, feeds him some lettuce, and puts him in a matchbox, and leaves him to go to sleep. The next morning she wakes up, opens the matchbox, and the frog says again, "Excuse me, Ribbit, ribbit, I'm really a prince. Just one kiss, please," and tells her the whole spiel again. She gives him some more lettuce, and she goes off to her job, whatever princesses do. Comes back at night, puts him back in the matchbox, puts him to sleep. And this goes on for a week. After a week, she opens the matchbox, as she does every morning, and he says, wait, no more lettuce, okay? What's the deal? I've been offering you to share everything I have with you, and I have a lot of assets, and you keep giving me lettuce and putting me in a matchbox. And she says, well, I already have a lot of wealth, but I've never had a talking frog. So sometimes, the skill and the asset that we have may not be appreciated by the marketplace, right? May not be in demand. Does that mean we should sacrifice those skills that we want to develop? Well, that's part of the question. Or should we force the marketplace in the industry to change and appreciate the assets which we think are important that we have? So I'll be looking for an answer to the dilemma of the princess and the frog from our panelists when we get into the discussion. Let me introduce them then. We have Mr. Rabea Ataya, starting from what will be your far left. He joins us from Dubai, where he's the founder and CEO of Bait.com, the Middle East's leading job site. Rabea, you could say, has his finger on the pulse of the job market in the Middle East. His company regularly produces research reports and surveys. He's a champion of providing employment opportunities to Middle Eastern youth through the internet and small and medium-sized enterprise sectors. Next to him, we have Mr. Khalid Alkhudair from Saudi Arabia, the founder and CEO of Glowork, an organization and initiative dedicated to recruiting women to the workforce in the Gulf Cooperation Council. Thousands of women have entered the workforce through Glowork, which on average assists 26 women a day to find employment. Khalid is a global shaper, a young global leader, a Global Agenda Council member on the Middle East and North Africa issues at the World Economic Forum. He's also a proud Ashoka Entrepreneurs Network Fellow and Endeavour Entrepreneur. He sits on a number of boards and advisory councils, which includes the L'Oreal Global Board and Advisory, a Global Board on Corporate Responsibility, and he recently won the King Salman Innovation Award. We also have Ms. Aysha Al Mudahka. She will offer us a local perspective on the region from her experience as CEO of Qatar Business Incubation Center. Now that center supports entrepreneurs in the startup stages, a very crucial stage of business. She herself is an example of how far you can go with ambition and hard work. Aysha previously served as executive director at the Qatar Education non-profit Injaz, where she had worked her way up from starting as a volunteer. She's a passionate advocate of empowering women and a founding member of the Women's Entrepreneurship Innovation Initiative, Roudha Center. They say ladies first, so let me start with Aysha. And in your experience, do you think the skill gap should be closed by training people, youth, to have the sort of skills which industry needs? Is that the right approach? Or should we be focusing on education to teach the skill of creativity, how the youth should think, how they should redefine the industry rather than them simply being programmed to do what the industry wants? In other words, who wins, the frog or the princess?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm happy to be here today. I think it's both. I think it comes down to both elements.
Can you have both? Don't these two always conflict? You know, the boss wants the employee, you do this, and the employee wants to be creative and think out the box, and it's being stomped on.
Well, I still believe we need both. And when it comes to education, the education system, coming from an early age, learning to be adaptive, critical thinking, being competitive in the market, is something that should be learned at an early age. So it should be part of the education system. Of course, I'll talk about Injaz a little bit because that's an example of how innovation, creativity, and skills that follow that are integrated into the system. So what happens is that they go through, from an early age, as I mentioned, they go through different programs of work readiness, entrepreneurship, and financial literacy into schools, very practical, very operational, and also very adaptive learning at the same time. So if you have these skills from an early age, as you grow further, you learn to adapt other skills moving forward. So I think it's important to build that from an early age, from the education system. And then at a later stage, I think it's very important to have institutes that supports entrepreneurship and building. So if you have the creativity and if you have the innovative part, you still need to learn how to start your business, how to deal with the market, and so on. So, for example, at Qatar Business Incubation Center, what we do is we provide a program called the Lean Startup Program. And the Lean Startup Program teaches you basically how to really engage with the market and focus on your customer validation rather than just building a business plan and what you have learned traditionally in terms of starting a business. And you go in the market, and it's very operational and it's very adaptive. And so skills you do need skills. It's an ongoing process when it comes to learning. It's a daily process, whether you are an entrepreneur or not. I think it's very important that the learning is always an ongoing process.
Do you find that people who've learned, so you basically, you take these young people, they learn that skills in the market, but do you find that they're able then to make the transition at some point, maybe a year, 5 years down the road, where they can be more creative and redefine the industry that they're working in?
If you give them the right skills, I don't see why not. I mean, if it's an ongoing process of adapting new skills, I don't see why they could not adapt new types of skills to learn to be better for their businesses.
All right. Has anyone thought of any questions at this point? Do we need to get microphones out to anyone? Okay, we've got a gentleman there. While we're getting the mic to him, Rabea, let's take a topical issue here. What about the Arab Spring? It's turned everything upside down. How's that impacted job availability, your ability to learn skills, your ability to find a job?
So obviously in the countries where the Arab Spring has still not sorted itself out, if it is still a spring, in Syria and Libya, obviously job availability continues to decline. But it's interesting to look at the case studies of both Egypt and Saudi Arabia and see how the Arab Spring affected both of them. And we quarterly survey both employers and job seekers about their views on what job availability will look like in the future. Interestingly, if you look at our studies on this for the last several years, Egypt, from a job seeker's perspective, job availability, what people thought would be job availability, kept on declining to very low levels right until the Arab Spring happened. And in fact, when you compared Egypt to pretty much everywhere else in the region, impressions of job seekers in Egypt were that things in the future from a job availability perspective were about to get much, much worse. And to a large degree, that's an unbelievable forecasting tool into what's going to happen. Now, as soon as they changed their government, what happened very, very quickly is optimism about job availability increased tremendously. And to a large degree, if you look at where we are today compared to the low point, the optimism is about 4 times as great. However, it's interesting to compare that to what employers think. And employers' feelings about what job availability is going to be into the future has remained consistent throughout that period.
Consistently low?
Consistently lower than in the Gulf, but
Right.
consistent. And so what you're seeing is the oscillation and very rapid oscillation of impressions from extreme depression about what's happening to the job market to extreme
High
optimism.
expectations.
And my fear right now is if the employer perspectives don't change, obviously that has the ability to come back very, very quickly. And so, you know, what employers and job seekers feel the future is going to look like is very, very different. Now in Saudi also, which is also a very interesting story, perceptions of both employers and job seekers about job availability increased throughout the Arab Spring. And that's partially because the Saudi government responded very, very quickly to what was happening in the region and invested a tremendous amount in order to ensure that there was workforce readiness and that there was more of a representation of the local population. And so the story is a mixed bag. Obviously, in Syria, you're in deep trouble. In Egypt, impressions are things have improved tremendously, but whether or not they have is yet to be seen. Employers don't think they've changed that much. And in Saudi, I think both employers and job seekers over the course of the last several years have seen tremendous improvements in terms of job availability. So every country has its own tale.
My name is Abdallah. I'm from Morocco. I'm a software engineer. My question is directed to the lady. We're talking about workforce readiness and skills, and I'm just wondering, because we had the same conversation yesterday, whose responsibility it is to ensure that youth and workforce are ready for the job market? Is it responsibility of universities? Is it responsibility of schools in general and formal institutions? Is it responsibility of themselves, or is it the employer's responsibility to ensure that their employees have the right skills for the right job? Thank you.
Very direct, clear question.
Again, I'll be diplomatic here and say it's all responsibilities, to be honest. The education system has to be ready to adapt programs that are related to developing skills ready for the market. I mean, it's important that these skills are learned from an early age, and it's not something that, I mean, you could learn it later on. I mean, this could be you could get it from an employer. Again, it's an ongoing process, but it starts from the education system. When it comes to schools and universities, I think they should be open to having either themselves or other organizations to support them to have these skills in the school and embedded in the school within the curriculum. And again, it's an ongoing process when it comes to the employers. I mean, if you have the ability to adapt new skills, if you have that mentality and mindset, it makes it easier to learn new skills moving forward.
Khalid, I'm curious to know your perspective on this, because you work with a whole host of organizations related to entrepreneurship. What is the message that you tell to young people when it comes to this question of should I be looking for? The government, the university, the employer to give me the skills? Or do you tell people, no, you go out and grab the initiative and you find a way?
Thank you for that. I think it's a whole ecosystem. I mean, I'll give you an example in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi, we have 8 million expats working, and you have 2 million who are unemployed. Now, this 2 million can easily go into working these 8 million jobs. Is it a matter of lack of vocational centers or universities? I think we have over 80 vocational training centers across the kingdom. We have over 30 universities. Training is available, skills are available, but what we lack is life skills. So when we are growing up, and I'll ask you a question. When you were a kid studying in the UK, I assume, did you, when you were in high school, did you go about knocking people's doors and try selling oranges or try selling something?
Me personally, I didn't know, but I was writing for newspapers and other things.
How old were you then?
Oh, in my late teenagers.
Okay, so in the kingdom, and probably in the whole GCC, from the day we are born, we don't work a day until the age of 24 when we graduate university. So we do not understand what lies ahead in the workforce. That's one. Number two is we are a bit spoiled as well. So at university, I get paid a salary to be a student. So why should I work? It's not where, globally you have the whole retail industry is built on students working.
Right.
You don't have that in this part of the world. So when you get exposed to how life is and difficulties of becoming independent, instead of being dependent on family and dependent on university, dependent on government, that allows you to tap into your inner strength and become a person where you want to make change, you want to create your own business, you want to start up, you understand the difficulties of life and of work.
But Khalid, that sounds like you're talking about a very deep social, societal problem here. This is not that can't be solved by just changing the education policy or
absolutely
a government policy, right? This is culture, habits, what sort of lifestyle I encourage my children to take up.
I'll give you an example of a study we did across 10 universities in 3 different cities in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, Riyadh, and Dammam. We asked the perception of what women wanted to work after graduation. And so in Riyadh, the majority of women wanted, when they graduate, around 60% want to work in government after graduation. In Dammam, the majority wanted to work in the private sector after graduation. And in Jeddah, the majority wanted to become entrepreneurs. Now they're all studying the same curriculum, they're studying the same books, the same everything. So we wanted to understand what makes this city different from the other city. And we found that in Riyadh, that when they're taught with books, that people go in, memorize the book, take their exam, and get out. That's it. There's no practicality embedded within education whatsoever. There's nothing that's utilizing your life skills. In Dammam, there is a huge influence of the private sector with Saudi Aramco based being there, so everyone had that dream and role model to work in that organization, so they want to work in the private sector. In Jeddah, books were used as references. Well, everything else was practical. So there's a lot of, TEDx talks. You'd have inspirational role models to come speak directly to students, and that just shows you the way that people are taught as well. And it's not a matter of university; it's also at home. It affects your perception, your ambitions, and so forth when you want to enter the labor market.
Rabea, is that common across we refer to this term, the MENA, as if it's one monolithic unit, but life is very different in the GCC to Morocco, for example, Lebanon. I imagine in some of these countries, probably there is a different lifestyle and approach to taking responsibility because there isn't the petro-state that's willing to carry you. It's fight and survive or die, right? I mean,
so that's a great question, and I think it ties back to the definition of what is the skills gap to begin with. If I look back in the history of at least my organization, in the year 2000 we started, the biggest challenge with the skills gap was that opportunity and talent could not find information out about each other. And so employers wanted certain skills and couldn't find it, and job seekers who had those skills didn't know about those opportunities. Now, fast forward 14, 15 years, we currently have about 24 million job seekers who have their profiles on Bait and over 50,000 companies who use us. And it's become the single largest marketplace for opportunity and talent to meet in this region. The information gap has disappeared. Now you've got a different problem. The skills gap represents itself in a very different way. And that way is the following. Every time an employer today posts a job on Bait, we look at how many applicants apply to that job and we compare to our global peers. If you advertise a job on the leading job site in Switzerland, you get 2 applicants. You do it in mainland Europe, on average you get 30 applicants. You do it in Latin America, which has high unemployment, you get 60 applicants. On Bait today, in average, you get over 500 applicants per job. So think about that. Now that they both know about each other, the realization is there just isn't enough opportunity to go around for this population of young Middle Eastern youth.
so what should they do? Do
They
become entrepreneurs? And
I'll add another challenge and then I'll talk about what they do. The other challenge is even with 500 applicants, over 63% of the employers claim that they have not found the right skill set amongst those applicants.
Wow.
And so now there are 2 questions to ask about what to do. The first is, for each of those jobs, how do we get people to be more qualified to fulfill the existing requirements? And again, we survey employers about their requirements. They're twice as likely to cite issues of attitudes and skills than they are knowledge. So our universities are preparing us well for the knowledge requirements of jobs, but they're not preparing us very well at all across the region for the soft skills that would make us successes. And so part of what has to be done is exactly what Khalid mentioned, is we need to start engaging people at a much younger age in workplaces in order that they better understand the skills. And universities and organizations that hire have to have a much closer form of communication to talk about their requirements. That's from the match what exists.
Right.
The next question is, how do we create the 100 million other jobs?
Yeah, because there's, as you said, there's many more job seekers than jobs, even if they have the right skills.
And the simple answer to that, and we can look everywhere else in the world to that answer, in the US, there's a great study that was done that shows that the US job market would have contracted every year for the last 40 years had it not been for organizations that are younger than 5 years old. So it is entrepreneurial ventures that actually drive net employment growth. And we need to help and encourage and teach people how to become better entrepreneurs. And I think fundamentally, the educational system upfront has to help people get the current jobs, because it's a shame that out of 500 applicants, employers can still complain. And then we also need to give people the life skills in order to be able to take on increasingly entrepreneurial roles. The good news, and I'll stop with that, is that over 60% of the young people we survey, and we survey large numbers, again, with a database of over 20 million professionals, over 60% of young people would prefer to work for themselves in the region. This is sort of region-wide, so there'll be
So there's
differences.
a good, strong entrepreneurial spirit.
There's a desire.
Right.
The question is, does that desire translate into actual action? And there are a whole bunch of things we can get into as to why not.
My name is Mohammed Iraqi. I'm Manager National Training for Qatar Airways. So question to Aisha, what do you recommend and what do you prefer? A graduate with 2 years of experience with grade B- or a fresh graduate with A+?
I mean, to join Cubic or start their business.
To start their business. And for sure will be via.
I need a commitment, to be honest. I need the commitment of the entrepreneur. What we've seen so far, I mean, at Cubic is that we have entrepreneurs from all age groups, young ones who are fresh graduates, maybe less committed, and ones who are in their 30s who gained a little bit of experience and they want to transform that into starting their own business. And then people who are more committed, and then people in almost the retirement age who want to invest in their own money and start their own thing based on their expertise, and you see that the commitment varies. So really it comes down to commitment.
How do you ascertain commitment, Aisha, when someone's in front of you? If you're not too worried about the A+ or the B-, or the, how do you establish this is commitment?
I think again, as Khalid said, it comes down to the mindset of the entrepreneurs and the willingness to fail at the beginning of starting their business, the willingness to take a risk. Again, as Khalid said, we come from a culture that it's very protective, and you know, as a baby, if you're falling off, they need to make sure that you don't fall.
Yeah.
They
Someone
hold
will
you
be there
and
to catch you.
yeah, they need to catch you and make sure that you're really overprotected, because the generation before us have suffered a lot to reach to where they are today. But I think that there was a message that came down two days ago from the Emir himself, Emir of Qatar, and that basically is encouraging the crowd and people to start their own businesses. This wealth is not going to last for long, and then that we need to be independent and not depend entirely on the government to start business or to be in the workforce. So I think it's a mindset that needs to be changed, that I'm willing to fail and meet my family with my failure. I mean, that kind of mentality needs to change in terms of to get a commitment. What happens sometimes is that we have entrepreneurs who are doing great, but they don't take that as their full-time job. They have their security on the side, and then they start their business. And you could do much more if you do it, if you become an entrepreneur full-time. So I think the willingness to choose entrepreneurship or starting your own business as a career choice is a new mindset that needs to be adopted.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sara Sami. I'm from Northwestern University in Qatar. I have a question to the sir from Lebanon. I'm sorry, I'm bad with names. Do you think that there's a high numbers of people who desire to have their own businesses or to become entrepreneurs because they're not allowed to be creative in the work field, because their managers or bosses don't let them do certain things or take on certain projects, so they want to start their own businesses, and therefore that's the desire. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Rabea. I think culturally, and we forget this, if you go back to most of our grandparents' generation in the region, they were either entrepreneurs or worked in small family business units and were entrepreneurial in nature. There weren't big businesses to think of. And I think what changed, I would say, in the last 30 years was bigger conglomerates started to exist in the region, and governments took on a bigger role, and people increasingly took what they perceived as low-risk jobs. And it's becoming fairly clear today that those low-risk jobs are no longer low-risk jobs, because governments are contracting their spending to a large degree, and large conglomerates are not continuing to grow in the way that they used to. And at the same time, young people, I do believe also, would love to have additional expressions for their freedom and their creativity, and entrepreneurship allows them a way to do so. So I think there's a lot of factors that come to play, and I think we often forget in this region that we do come from an entrepreneurial culture, a culture of traders, small business owners. This is our natural state, quote unquote. And I think to a large degree, we need to revert back to that natural state if we're going to create long-term success and opportunities for all of these young people in the region.
Is that possible, Rabea, when the region is currently experiencing a lot of political and even military instability? I mean, how do you, if we're saying, okay, governments are not the safety net anymore, in some parts of the region, governments are challenged or collapsing. How, the private sector doesn't want to put its money into an unstable area. I mean,
is it possible? It certainly is possible, but it goes back to what Aysha said about commitment. It's certainly a lot more challenging. So when I think, I'm a founder of Bait. I've founded other businesses that have grown, and I'm a regular investor in startups. The level of commitment you need here is so much higher because the obstacles that are thrown in your way are so much more. But at the same time, the impact in entrepreneurship, because of the challenges, you sense that every day, and there's a great reward in that. So is it possible? It is. And again, I can cite many successful entrepreneurial stories in the region, and in this panel there are a few of them, and I'm sure in this room there are others. And so it's not easy, but it's well worth it if one is patient and fights the battles. And I'll just add, so in our battles, I was just sitting with Khalid and talking about when I was setting up an office in Riyadh, I arrived at a compound one night at 11 p.m. only to have the compound attacked by midnight and had to crawl out from under the rubble somewhere. Now, in any other part of the world, that's not part of your entrepreneurial journey, right? And that's not something you have to consider. and that's just, we've had governments across the region invite us with open arms to open up offices, and then 2 years later, once our offices have expanded and are responsible for significant hiring, come in and want to shut us down overnight because some bureaucrat, has woken up on the wrong side of the bed. So these journeys are challenging, but the fact that we survived them means that even when we've had massive local, massive international organizations come after us competitively, they've always failed because they are not able to roll with the blows of the region, for good or for bad, and that leaves space and opportunity for the local entrepreneurs.
Hello, my name is Khadija. I'm Belgian and Moroccan. I define myself as a social entrepreneur in education. My main field is Africa and the Middle East region. I do not mind who's going to answer it, guys. Okay, lady. Back in the times when our parents went out of school, they went into companies, and those companies made sure they trained them to the right skills, and that lasted over 50 years, and I'm speaking here globally. So we didn't have that problem of who is going to do what with fresh graduates. They trained their own employees. Why is it that today, when we go out of universities, that question is asked? I can't believe that the answer would be, well, because the business is growing and innovation is constantly on the pathway. I just can't believe that, because innovation also happened at that time, and it was new for that time too. So why is that today the question is reversed to higher university institutions and not businesses? Thank you.
It's the employer's responsibility. Employers need to start investing into training. In this part of the world, and what I've seen working in the kingdom, over the last decade, the government has been very supportive of providing subsidies for training. So employers have also tried to leverage what the government gives them. And that causes a bit of a conflict. So employers would tailor programs that the government would only approve. And that doesn't necessarily mean that this program is fit for the candidates that are entering into the labor market. With that being said as well, I'll give another example where we have in the kingdom a subsidy to support nationals entering the private sector. So if I am a national and I enter, the company gets paid a certain fee every month per salary for a period of 2 to 4 years as a support. Now, what the unfortunate mismatch is that if this person graduated, for instance, history and goes to work in recruitment or in marketing, the subsidy will not be given for the employer because the degree does not match the level or the certain work type that you're entering into. And that discourages employers from bringing somebody from a different background, different industry, where we have a problem because we don't know, we have courses on history and where we don't have jobs in that field. So people go into it because they are passionate about it. Yet there is a mismatch between what the labor market demands are and the education sector. So I definitely agree with you. It's a mix between both. Government and the private sector need to see what are the jobs that are available, and based on that, the majors and the career and the education degrees that are offered in university should be adopted, and then the training should come into play based on that. I mean, I don't like to give this as an example, but my mom, who's Iraqi, she went into university, and the day that she went into university, she already had her job offer. From day one, she already knew where she's going to work, and this was back in the days in Iraq. Every student that went into university would have their job offer from the day they entered the university. So as soon as you graduate, you know where you're working. And I see that as a really a great model where people know where you're heading towards.
Is it sometimes counterproductive in the sense, Khalid, that when students, the youth in this part of the region sometimes are guaranteed a job when they know they can't be fired, they don't have an incentive to develop their skills further, they don't have an incentive to look for entrepreneurship, they've got the safe job. And come on, let's be honest, we all know the stories of they don't have the incentive to show up for work in many cases. You know, does government policy need to change?
Absolutely. Right now the private sector is not as let's say incentivizing for a job seeker to go work in, even though you have all the stuff where the expectation of you can't fire me and I can come to work whenever I want and I can do whatever I want. And there's a lot of support for nationals in that perspective. So government policy does need to change. But at the same time, the private sector themselves, there are ways around these policies, and I've worked on this myself. So when I have a Saudi that's not performing, I can let go of him. It's just that the policy says you cannot fire him for doing X, Y, and Z, but you can do him for doing A, B, C. And that's what's not highlighted. The same thing is, you need to highlight the benefits of privacy. I don't think there's enough employer branding in this region. And I speak from perspective of women universities, for instance. Companies, because the whole women employment bubble just started happening in the kingdom, they're not getting their messages out into the university of what companies are out there. So in 4 years of a ladies' education, everyone wants to work in education. why do they want to work in education? Because the only person they see in 4 years is their teacher. They don't see anyone else. So they want to become, this is their role model, this is their inspiration, this is who they want to be. So that also needs to change. And the curriculums themselves need to adopt case studies, need to know what companies are out there, you need to you need to do researches. Internship only started 2 years ago in Saudi Arabia, where it became mandatory that students have to go and take an internship. I remember there was only one university in the kingdom, and this university was the one university that we would hire from, because they had the 7-month co-op or training period that they mandatory had to do somewhere. So they come in there ready, they have this induction of what their labor market is, they know that they have to come in time, they have to email, which is really the soft skills. And so that adds a huge importance when you add a sense of employment during education period.
I'm glad you mentioned the example there of the aspirations of women for employment. And since, Rabea, you're the man with your finger on the pulse of the job market, as I said, we do need to talk a little bit before the time runs out about particularly the situation for female employment. What does it look like right now in the MENA region, if we can brush that broad brush stroke?
So again, just like you said, it is a broad brush. And if you look at Tunis, for example, if you ask women in Tunis about their representation in the employment market and their promotability and their pay, they'll claim extremely high equality figures with their male counterparts. If you go to Saudi, you're going to get a very, very different story. And I guess it's very difficult, almost impossible to paint a broad brush. But let me cite perhaps some interesting statistics which I found unexpected. One was that while we asked women across the region about what their workplace needs were and how fairly they felt they were being treated in the workplace and how well represented they were, we also asked them how they felt they compared to their Western counterparts. And over 75% of them felt that they were doing at least as well, if not better, than their Western counterparts. So while they recognize that there are challenges in each of their markets, they feel that those challenges are universal women challenges, not specific to them. And that's something that I would have never guessed a priori to that discussion. Similarly, the type, and again, I'm putting my personal expectations prior to doing these studies, my sense was benefits mattered at least as much as pay or promotability in terms of selecting jobs for women in the workplace. And that turned out to be very far from the truth. And similar to men, when asked to rank what was most important in selecting a job, pay and career progression were the two top things. And specific women benefits ranked far lower in the list of requirements. And so what that tells me is this problem is a universal one with local peculiarities. And obviously what I mean by local, it's almost hyper-local, because from city to city and country to country, the variation is very immense.
My name is Yahya Houri, and I work for Silitech. It's a Qatari organization that works on supporting youth employment and entrepreneurship, and I think we work with all three of your organizations. So this question, I think, is less to Aysha and more to Khalid and Rabea, because it's not actually about job creation, it's about job placement. And I want to go back to the general theme of this talk, which is about the skills gap. Obviously, it's very difficult. It's much more difficult to create jobs and to actually fill existing ones. And I think, Rabea, your example of 500 applications to one job is quite illustrative. One, of the fact that maybe there aren't enough jobs, but also of the fact that a lot of youth don't know what jobs to apply for. So we've actually used by technology to survey some of the users that are part of our audience and seen that on both sides, actually, youth are applying to jobs that are completely unqualified for, and employers are asking for qualifications that at the end up hiring someone completely different. Khalid, I know that you have very successful that you organize very successful job fairs that really focus on that matching. And I know that you guys have on Bait a very strong matching algorithm. But I want to ask you guys, what else can we do and what more can we do to really increase that efficiency of matching between existing jobs? Because we keep hearing about employers who are dying to hire candidates and not able to find the right candidates, and candidates who just apply to 500 jobs a day, maybe 10% of which are actually relevant to their experience. What can we do to focus on that? Because I feel it would be an easy win for us, or for all of us, rather than, also in parallel focus on entrepreneurship and on job creation. Thank you.
You're asking from a technology perspective or from a broad? We will soon be using very intensive technology. One thing that we don't have, and I mentioned this whole employer branding aspect of things. So I see General Electric out there. Perception is that that means I need to be an engineer. There isn't accounting, there isn't HR, there isn't marketing. We have a problem in this part of the world of telling stories, and positive stories, and role models, and putting together a sort of a career map. I think when a youth comes in and sees that there is sort of a career path available in marketing or in HR in a certain field, aside from the concept of what this business actually does, people start getting more aware of what sort of jobs are available for them. From my perspective, for 4 years now, since we've been working in this field, we've now, inshallah, at the end of this month, we're launching something which is a social recruitment app based on your behaviors through a social network community. It would link you to opportunities that are of your interest. So, you type in text on buildings, it will link you to jobs in architecture and interior design, and so on. So I think there's a lot you can do with technology. I'm sure Rabea has...
Thank you for the question, Yahya. One of the things that's becoming obvious to me is the CV, as we know it, is becoming an obsolete artifact. And part of the reason for that is the volume of CVs have become so large that the check-the-box type of filtration no longer works. Because I can go on to global databases right now and search for accountants who have 10 years experience, a CPA, and whatever, and I'll still probably find hundreds of thousands potentially. And so the real question becomes, how do we add dimension to the professional profile to allow the job seeker to shine and the employer to make a better choice? And a lot of that dimension has to be about the check-the-box stuff has to still be there, but it has to be a representation of the soft skills that employers use to make cultural decisions. And so the realization today is that a lot of employability fails because it's no longer about specific hard knowledge skills. It's about how well do you fit into my organization. And so we're doing a lot of things on that front. One of our original attempts, and there's a lot of work on it, is questionnaires where employers, myself included, every time I post a job that's related to someone I want to hire, I actually overlay a questionnaire on top of that job, and it's primarily cultural questions that I ask to get a better understanding at the point of application of both commitment as well as fit. We also launched a social angle to our site called Specialties, where people engage around their fields of specialty and their peers vote up their contributions. Now, what that helps us do also is you get a great insight into someone's thinking even before they walk through the door. And we've made some very, very successful hires as a result of that, because it's no longer about is this person an accountant and do they have the right number of years of experience, but how do they tackle specific workplace problems. And so we're continually coming up with new technologies to make the old CV richer and more meaningful for both parties.
If I could, I want to try and steer us a little bit towards the discussion on women employment. And Aysha, there are a lot of initiatives which are trying to encourage, obviously, female employment, female education, and it's well known, of course, that the female workforce, contribution to the workforce can be a great positive contribution to the economy if it's managed right. Is it being managed right? Or are women ending up simply another number on the jobless queue or the job seekers along with their male counterparts?
I'll talk a little bit about Qatar in terms of employment. I mean, until today we have 51% of women employed in the workforce that are women employed. So that's a big number. I mean, it's almost the same. So that shows that there's a positive and an equal opportunity here in Qatar for women to go and enter the workforce. And not just being in the workforce, but there's also amazing leaders who are in the country. And our leader, our women, we have many women leaders in the royal family, and they are active in the community, and there's a lot of achievements that happened, followed that. So I think we have great examples to follow. So really there is no, obviously there are certain challenges, of course. I mean, as you go up into the workforce, reaching to managerial and even further levels, it does get challenging because of certain culture constraints, meetings of men. For example, there's a lot of majlis gatherings that happen, and there's a lot of decision making that happens during that time where women are not involved. There needs to be some changes in the policies. Maternity leaves are quite short from my personal experience. And I think that there needs to be some more policy changes, but I think we are heading there. I think it's promising. Education is for free for everyone, and almost.
Do you have specific policies to meet some of the challenges which Rabea and Khalid have been talking about in general, about closing the gap between skills, or whether it's encouraging entrepreneurs? Does that get more specific when you're talking particularly about female employees?
Yeah, I think...
so if you just microphone a little bit closer, I want to make sure everyone hears you.
I tend to do that a lot. Okay, so I think that and when it comes to some policies, I think there needs to be more flexibility for women. But that shouldn't be looked down as something that could affect her efficiency at work and her being progressive moving forward in her career. I think that needs to be tackled, and I think from the skills side, I think that there needs to be certain programs related to women employment and women empowerment in the workforce. I think it's very important.
Like what? What's missing?
I think I talk about my person. I was lucky, to be honest, because I had two women directors and bosses in the past, and they were very supportive. I remember that my first boss made sure that I go into a lot of trainings, and she pushed me, even though I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at the time before I joined Injaz. And I felt like I was lucky because I had that model in front of me who had,
a mentor,
who was there for me, who had a really good experience. I mean, in the workforce, 25 years of experience at the time, and she made sure that I get more and further education and to get exposed to not just Qatar but internationally. So I think, and taking the risk. I mean, and there are hard and soft skills that are necessary for women to actually take moving forward. Again, it's an ongoing learning process. And this is not a local issue. I mean, as you go up the ladder, it's an international problem. So, yeah.
My name is Suad. I'm from Dubai. I'm the CEO of Education Zone. We do student counseling and to check if the student matches the university and whatnot. So the skill gap, I was hoping that you have replicated a report that was done internationally by Hilton and Pellegrino, where they discovered that that there are many skills in the whole world with the students, from littlehood to when they go to university. There are other interpersonal skills or cognitive skills, and it affects like their creativity and their like decision making. There's also writing and reading skills that there are shortage in that. There's in the mathematical side, there's shortage. There's like in all of this, and there was someone at the previous conference, they were gonna do the same skill gap in the Middle East, and I'm certain it's gonna be similar because that's what I see in our students. So when they go to the jobs, these skills, that Hilton Pellegrini found out, that it affects their, further advancement in the job market, or even it affects their ability to get a job to begin with, because of all these skill shortages. Like some people, they go into a job and they find that their time management is pathetic, so they get sacked, for example. So what they found out is that if we start training children from littlehood on avoiding these, like the cognitive and interpersonal skills, like, improving themselves to match them, that when they grow up, they become more into the entrepreneurial side, where they're self-dependent and, pushed, to the limit and whatever, rather than someone who wants or depends on a normal employment. So the people who applied these, try to eliminate the skill gap in the people, they found that if you train them from littlehood, then you are eliminating a lot of the problems, like probably 90% of the problems that people face when they become ready to work, sort of thing. And that's my comment. I've got a comment about Rabea's system. It's very good that you did the thing on top of the CV. I wish I can get that, because I get a lot of people applying for jobs with us, and they don't really match what we want, and maybe that's something that will help employers. Yes, I'm going to contact you on your
Yeah, you
email.
feel free to get in touch. Everyone feel free to get in touch with the panelists afterwards and thank you for that comment. Maybe the gentleman.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
My name is Mohammed Al-Khatib. I'm the head of education and business development in King Abdullah Economic City, Saudi Arabia. Actually, I have a question to both Mr. Rabea and Khalid. Actually, I personally believe that the problem starts from the school, and the solution also starts from the school. And the solution is there. What are the skills needed? What's the gap? We all know it. But the initiative that should be taken, especially from your esteemed company as recruitment companies, is the most important thing to be thought of. As you rightfully said, the talent and the opportunity gap is solved. And Bait.com or Workflow now knows what's the needed skills in the market. And the interfacing that you're doing with the employers, or maybe at the level of a university only, students, graduates, is might not be enough, because there is a layer of vocational education also, and there is also the school. My question is, to make it brief, what are the initiatives, or are you willing to do any initiative with the schools, the high school, to give them visibility that you have on the marketplace? And in order to have these skills embedded in the high school students, which will they carry it to the vocational or to the university, then they are equipped.
Let's get specific. What kind of initiative? Are you talking about starting internships very early, or some kind of exposure to it?
It means they outreach and they go to the schools, they give them their knowledge.
At what age are we talking?
High school, which is grade 11 and 12, then they can go also to vocational.
Okay.
So this is my question.
I think that Aysha as well may have something to say about that. Let's give everybody a chance.
Please go.
Sure. Sorry, I know the question is addressed to the gentleman, but I can answer this question for you as well. I mean, there are organizations. I used to work for Injaz Qatar, and what Injaz, I'll just be more specific on what Injaz does. And it does exactly that. I mean, what they do is they get, and Injaz exists in 123 countries. They are in all MENA countries, in the 15 countries, or 15 countries in the MENA. And what they do is basically is they connect professionals from the private sector to go to schools and deliver programs of entrepreneurship, work readiness, and financial literacy to the students. They have their own curriculum, They teach them about communication skills, interviews in the workforce, the skills that are needed in public speaking, entrepreneurship skills. One of the programs that they deliver is called Company Program. What they do is they actually create a company for a period of 6 months, and they have the corporate volunteer from the private sector guiding them as a mentor during the whole journey to start up their company. And they vote for their CEOs and their HR manager and their finance manager and all the VPs in the company. They raise shares. They raise shares to actually create these. They sell shares to create these companies, and they do the production. They do the marketing, and then they compete against different schools across the country. With the company program, and with this initiative, the winner goes to a regional competition against all the 14 countries. So they are exposed to so many things during the process. They have their mentor from the private sector. They learn about public speaking. They learn about failing or winning a company during that time. So competition is there, critical thinking, and everything. Teamwork is there. So there's a lot of skills that are built throughout the process. In the region, they develop it. I mean, from a middle in Qatar, for example, we start from 12 years old to 23 years old. In Bahrain, they start from primary school. I'm not sure about Saudi, but there are these initiatives, and I think what needs to be done is that the schools should be open more to accepting programs like this within the schools, and the ministries of education. The government needs to support NGOs and initiatives like that that support the youth in developing skills and connecting them with the private sector. And the private sector also has a responsibility as well to recruit these volunteers, give time to their employees to go to such initiatives, because if you're working from 9 to 5 and dedicate some time to go to school, there needs to be a commitment from the organizations themselves to actually support volunteers to go to school. So it's really a whole ecosystem of people supporting and making sure that this is everyone's responsibility, not just one side of the table.
No career counseling was the question, because I don't think everyone heard that.
That's totally true. I'll give you a shocking statistic. You have 63% of women pay someone to write their CV for them. And that's due because there isn't proper career counseling. So one of the things which we're very proud of, and we've done with Sulatech, which is based out of here, is we set up the first career center inside Prince Sultan University, career counseling center, which we provided training to the faculty members on becoming career counselor. And then we established a portal which is also through Sulatech, which is called Tamheed. It's a psychometrics portal where students would take an exam online, a very user-friendly exam, and then this exam they would sit down with a career counselor to sit and tell them what sort of major, what sort of jobs are out there for them, and so forth. So that's just set up, and we've seen the results as well. We've been monitoring the learnings and behaviors of them. So major shifts between those that wanted to work in public versus now those that want to work in private after having the career counseling session. And so that is something that's just adopted, and we've just been requested from the government to do another 4 in 4 other universities. So it's something that helps us also with our business. So, yeah.
Rabea.
I think I'll give you an example of the outreach we do, and then I'll talk very briefly about the problem. So we just helped launch in a school in Dubai a high school senior business plan competition. And entrepreneurial teams came together from across high schools in Dubai, organized a business plan, pitched it, and the winners got a scholarship to go to university that was paid by us. Now, what's interesting about the schools that participated in this, they were all the schools that don't have an issue with the skills gap. They were the schools that were already preparing their kids adequately enough to get to where they need to. Exactly. And when we try and reach out to the public schools with similar concepts, they have absolutely no interest. finding even the right door to open is very, very difficult. And then when you knock on it, and here we're giving offers of money, right? We're saying if you win, you get a scholarship to go to university. I mean, what could be better than that for your students? And so it takes the responsibility in all of these things is not the job seekers alone, or the employers alone, or the universities alone, or the governments. All of us have a role to play. We all have to do our best efforts, and together we get much better results. So, you know, the fact that we get a lot of no's doesn't prevent us from proceeding, and the fact that we want to train people doesn't mean that we still don't want the universities to also better train. We feel that everyone needs to raise the bar because this region just has such a massive challenge ahead of it. It is perhaps the most difficult employment challenge, obviously, of our times. There's 100 million people who are entering the workforce, and we have the highest youth unemployment numbers compared to any other region in the world. And so we all need to rise to the occasion.
All right, I know there's probably many other questions, but we are out of time here. However, do feel free to approach the panelists after this discussion, and you can continue that conversation with them, make that contact. I want to thank everybody. Just to highlight some of I think the important thoughts that have come out of this is that there does need to be a better connection and contribution to preparing the youth for the sort of skills that they need. It was interesting to hear what Rabea said about the optimism and the expectations being so high, as well as the challenges. And it was interesting to hear some of the initiatives that I learned about for the first time from Khalid and Aysha about what governments are doing to try and close both the skills gap and encourage entrepreneurship. So there may be more potential than we realize, and that's something, as well as what the lady pointed out, that we need to take home and start thinking about what we teach our kids in terms of taking initiative and responsibility early on. Thank you very much. A warm round for the panelists. Thank you.